So, hi everyone. This is our last segment of this leadership conference, specifically on mental performance. And I am Elle Ingalls. I've been your host for this conference. In 2010, I created an on-the-go stress management method that I named the pressure-free method. And what I mean by the pressure-free method is that no matter what pressure you are under, no matter what you are experiencing, you get to not release the fight or flight stress response in your body, not release stress hormones that are going to affect your mind and your body. And as we've been talking today with all of these different speakers, you can kind of feel some of that going on, which I think is, really quite powerful. And so I'm just going to dive in and share my method right up front here with you. I'm also going to be hosting a workshop. And for those of you who are live, I'll be sending this out to everybody, but you'll get a link to the workshop. It's going to be, a really powerful workshop specifically on my method and going really deep on it in terms of how it affects our mental performance and how I help other coaches take their coaching to a whole new level. So in 2010, I created this method. It is 3 simple steps: targets, triggers, tools. Back in 2010, hardly anybody used that word triggers. Triggers meant something on a gun, right? So now it's been quite ubiquitous that people use this term to represent things that make us feel a certain way, a certain tightness. But let's start first with targets. So targets are what you are aiming for. And targets tend to fall into 3 areas for people. Performance targets, that could be your career, your money, what it is you want to achieve in life, skills and talents. The second form are anything to do with health, both mental health and physical health. The fight or flight stress response either causes directly or exacerbates all mental and physical illnesses. So when you can get a handle on your stress response, this can all change quite radically. So health, people will come to me. For example, some people will simply say, "Elle, I need to feel happier," or "I need to feel better. I've been stuck in anxiety and depression for years." We heard Alex's story, incredible story. And I can't believe that professionals were telling him that he didn't really have a future. Like there was really nothing he could do and he had to just accept it. And thank goodness he didn't, because he's now transformed his life and made so much happen. So the brain can change quite significantly when we feed it the right things in terms of food, in terms of thoughts. So health-wise, mental health-wise, if you have any sort of condition or have been diagnosed with anything, I want you to be really open to the fact that things can actually change for you. And then the third is relationships. So sometimes people come to me because they're having difficulty in a relationship with a partner, with a child, with a parent, and they really want to understand how their behaviors are influencing that and how they can change that up. So when you've identified some targets, that's your fuel to do the next 2 steps. When I was first creating the pressure-free method, I didn't have that as a step, to be honest, targets. I would just dig right in on triggers and tools. And I realized soon into my practice that something was missing. If I could help people identify what they want or what they don't want. For example, health-wise, my father had heart disease and diabetes starting in his late 30s. My mother died of breast cancer. Those are 3 things I would like to not have. So I would like myself to stay really healthy without chronic disease, is how I would pitch that in my head to myself. That's my target. So if you have something you don't want, if you're having arguing going on with a relationship or something's going on that way, you can say, okay, what is it that you do want? What kind of relationship do you do want? That's your target. People tend to have 3 to 5 targets to start out with me when I'm working with them privately. So if you can come up with a couple things that are really important to you, like this needs to switch. Again, it can be purely emotional. What are the emotions you want to feel? Do you want to be more confident? We've talked about confident a lot today. Do you want to have more connection in your life? Do you want to feel more energized? Like, what are the words that really state for yourself what you want? What are your targets? So step 2, triggers. I realized when I looked at my own self that I don't get very anxious and I don't get very angry, but I would get annoyed at a lot of things. And it was annoyance that was causing me to trigger the fight or flight stress response pretty much on a moment to moment basis because I like things a certain way. I just have some ideas of how things should go. And if they don't go that way, I would get very annoyed. So I started to delve into what emotions will cause us to, or prime the pump, if you will, to trigger the fight or flight stress response. And I came up with these. I call them the A's. Anytime you feel annoyed or angry, anytime you feel anxious or afraid, and anytime we feel ashamed. Also, anytime something enters our environment and it shakes us up. And I refer to that word as abuse. It could be physical abuse. It could be verbal abuse. It could also be someone's tone of voice. Tone of voice was talked about today by a couple of our speakers. And also environmental, so sounds and smells and touch, like how fabrics feel on your skin. So any sort of thing coming into your environment that could shake you up. Anytime you start to feel tension in your body, maybe you start grinding your teeth or clenching, or your shoulders go up, or you feel your abs tightening, or you clench your hands, or even clench your toes. So I once was working with a fellow in his office and I was like, where is his tension? I'm trying to look in his body. It was in his toes. His toes were curled up in his dress shoes. And I saw like a bump and I said, oh, is that where you're tight in your body? So you can kind of do a body scan to notice, where am I holding some tension? When Emma came on today, she talked about how she picks her cuticles or bites her cuticles. That's a tension point. She can notice and say, oh, I see that. And I always share with my clients, don't consider it like a bad thing, but it's like, oh, this is telling me that something's working on me. I mean, my shoulders are up. Like, what else is going on with me? So you start to become really, really aware. So what emotions are you feeling and what's causing you to feel those emotions? Those are your triggers. You start to map them out. You start to list them out. Now, don't get like, some people will list out a ton of them. I don't want you to get too like overwhelmed with the fact that a lot of things cause you to feel these emotions. We're going to start with just a few things, and I use the word play intentionally. We're going to play with a few things to start with so you can gain some traction. I should add that as a T, because once we start to gain some traction of awareness of these triggers, we can do something about them. But until we're aware, until we actually see it, we're just letting stress hormones release in our body continually, almost all day long, for most people several times in an hour. And that's keeping us locked in the stress cycle. So the third step of the pressure-free method, step 3, are tools and the 10-second solution. So from a resting heart rate, and hopefully those, if you're watching this, you're at a resting heart rate right now. At a resting heart rate, it's going to take about 10 seconds before the fight or flight stress hormones will release, and you're now under the influence. And I use that term very specifically because just like any other drugs that you might take into your body, these are drugs we release inside our bodies. These are hormones that cause so many side effects, it takes over an hour for me to list them all. So what I'm going to share with you is that, and I refer to this flood of hormones that releases, by the way, as a cocktail. They're called catecholamines. But the first flood of hormones that release is actually a cocktail. Adrenaline is the chief hormone that's released in the first phase of the stress cycle. So you'll have this adrenaline, and now you will have a ton of energy, but that energy is not focused energy. You may feel a great deal of unfocus here. You might have a lack of willpower. You might have some problems memorizing things or bringing up things that you should remember very well. Here's an easy way to notice this. If you ever go into a social situation, you meet someone for the first time, ask yourself, and then you ask yourself, oh, what's their name? You've forgotten the name already. You just met someone, and 5 seconds later, you can't remember their name. It's not because we're stupid. It's because we've released these hormones at some point coming to this event, and our hippocampus is somewhat shut down. We can't lodge a memory and retrieve it very well at all. So that's the same case with test anxiety, which we heard today from Hugh when he was sharing about, we had to write the essay, and normally he would have test anxiety. He needs this grade, and so he's not thinking very clearly. In fight or flight, by the way, and Hugh mentioned this, the F words. Here are the F words. So fight, flight, so you could flee, run away, freeze, you feel stuck, you don't know what to do next, unfocused. Some people fidget. That's what Emma points, she's fidgeting. And when we release the stress hormones, we've got a lot of fat, glucose, and glycogen pulls out of our liver, and that metabolizes or hydrolyzes into glucose. We've got all this energy. And so you find yourself, your leg jiggling, or you're clicking a pen in the meeting. It's because you've got a lot of energy going on. So if you feel that kind of fidgety stuff, it's a sign that you've probably triggered fight or flight. Something I learned from the ADD community is that people make up lies, they fib. Usually little tiny lies, but if the boss asks, hey, have you got that project done yet? And you say, oh yeah, it's almost done, even though you haven't started it yet. You're just trying to cover your butt. You're so afraid if they found out how your work habits really were, you might get fired. So little lies, little fibs. And another one is fawning. We'll over flatter. So you go see somebody and be like, oh, I love your sweater. You're just like trying to get into the tribe. Because most of us feel a little bit like misfit toys. We feel a little bit that we don't quite belong in situations. We heard that from the speakers today, just kind of feeling a little bit on the outside that you don't really belong. And so that's definitely a sign that you've triggered fight or flight. So fight or flight, tools in the 10-second solution. From a resting heart rate, you have about 10 seconds before fight or flight kicks in and has all these things happening in your body. The cocktail has released. Most people don't understand there's a second cocktail that goes out to fix your brain cells in your extremities that we've pulled fat and glucose out of to mobilize for energy. We need to fix these cells. So glucose and cortisol goes out. Cortisol is getting a really bad rap these days, and I want to say stop canceling cortisol. Cortisol is a very important drug. It's a hormone that actually gets the salt, sugar, and water content of your brain back to normal, and you're back online. So we really need cortisol to go out. It has some really great purpose if you've triggered the adrenaline. So we need to look at the first flood of hormones and prevent that flood if you don't want the cortisol to go out, because cortisol does have a lot of negative, so does adrenaline, by the way, a lot of negative side effects. Both of these floods of hormones mess with every one of your body's processes, every single one of them, and literally does damage to your cells and causes every chronic disease or makes it worse. So that's really important to know. And by the way, this cycle that takes place from the beginning to end for a male can take up to 9 hours before the hormones are dissipated out of the cells and you're back to normal. And for females, it's an up to 24-hour issue. So up to 24-hour cycle before you're back to quote unquote normal. That is a long time for your body and mind to be compromised. So we need to stop releasing that first flood of hormones. What can you do in that 10-second window when you first start to feel a tension or an emotion or recognize a target? What can you do in that 10 seconds so you don't release the hormones? That is the brilliance of the pressure-free method. There's plenty you can do. I teach over 40 things in my courses with my clients because everyone is unique. By the way, I could give you a couple of tools here. You might try them and then you might say, oh, it doesn't work for me. Well, that's because we only tested a couple of the tools. You heard Emma mention a couple tools, Leela mentioned a couple tools, and Hugh mentioned a couple tools. There's so many tools in my tool belt, and that's because you are unique. We need to match up what your triggers are with, and even the things like your traumas in your past and all the things that have happened to you, your habits of reaction, that's what we're breaking. And we need to find the right tools that work for that. I am going to give a couple tools because I want you to have some success and start working, have an action item you can use right away. So the first tool, and Hugh mentioned it, it's rather silly on purpose, but most of us are inside the hamster wheel. and we're running and running and running. My tool is called the celebration Ferris wheel. It's very important, that celebration part. It's actually a piece of the reason this tool works. I want you to get out of the hamster wheel, get around behind it, and turn your wheel into a beautiful little Ferris wheel, big enough so you can push a car and it gets spinning for you. The spinning of this wheel is a metaphor for the energy of your life. So when you push the wheel and it's spinning, and now you're not inside it, so it spins very freely, you just gave yourself this little window of quality life as if you did not release your stress hormones. That is powerful. So when you push up like this, it's a very silly thing to do. And when you do it, you actually lift your ribs and you open, just like Leela was teaching us. So we open, and our chest is now in a frame that tells our brain there's no reason to go into fight or flight. There's no reason we're under attack, because our body would go like this to protect. So you actually fooled your brain into thinking everything is fine. So when you push, you lift it up. I want you to keep your ribs lifted. And then it's a silly thing to do, so hopefully you smile. When you smile, you release neuropeptides that actually keep the transmitters, dopamine, serotonin, and others, the ones required for your outer brain and your hippocampus to work, still working. That is so powerful. Not only that, a large motion is one of the only ways an adult brain can instantly start to create new neural pathways and create and change a habit very quickly. So that's why I have you do a big motion. If you walk around like this all day, then we need to come up with another motion that you don't usually do, something with your arms and legs that's unusual. But most of us are not raising the roof all day. Maybe you are. So the celebration Ferris wheel, I want you to celebrate. Even if you still feel your face turn red or you get jittery, you know you've gone into fight or flight, I still want you to celebrate, because you just noticed a trigger. And the next time that trigger comes along, you'll probably stand a better chance at interrupting it. But if we get dejected and feel like we have failed, then we're falling down into the muck. It's very hard to get out of that muck, by the way, because we'll keep re-triggering the stress response and we'll stay in that lower space. I want you to take you and just lift your roller coaster of emotions. We want to plane it off a little bit and lift the whole thing up and tip it a little so that you're actually achieving traction and moving in a really great direction. That's what we do here at Pressure Free. So targets, triggers, tools. I have so much more that I can teach you and that I want to teach you. But just a little bit about my practice before we close out here. And then I will also be giving you information about the workshop. And by the way, I'll be doing another similar conference in the next month. If you're watching this in May, it will be in June 2023. And just stay tuned. You can always sign into my site so we can keep connected, and you can find out what's happening with Pressure Free. The main things that I do with people is I privately coach. I coach as young as 10, as old as 80. My clients tend to be either people who want to achieve more in their life and feel stuck, or secretly stressed. They don't want anyone to know. So it could be very high functioning, but inside they have a lot of anxiety going on, or even depression. Maybe they've had panic attacks. They have chronic disease going on. People usually come to me for performance, health, or relationships, which are those targets that I mentioned in the first step of Pressure Free. And I have a 3-month program that I take my adults through. I have a 6-session program I take my students through. And then I also have a certification program. So now I'm certifying people, and I had 3 of my certified clients come on today. Leela, Hugh, and Emma have all gone through my 9-month certification program. That program teaches you the method, helps you begin to master it deeply, and instantly start teaching it to your clients, your patients, whomever it is you are working with. My dream is to spread Pressure Free all over the world and have people in every country, and even in Antarctica, as Leela has coached in Antarctica, using the Pressure Free method. So I host these conferences, and I also host retreats, live events, in person and here. And I'm always out speaking to groups. So I'm a high performance speaker, transformational speaker, not just a motivational speaker. We actually help, and I teach the method right up front here. We get some really good things going with people. I also host retreats for companies, two full day retreats if they like. And I have workplace initiatives as well. So lots of ways to learn the pressure-free method. If you are interested, please, you can go right to my site, ellingalls.com or pressure-free.com, and you'll see a button for a free consultation. I'd love to talk to you about how maybe this is for you, maybe it's for a group, or maybe you have a speaking engagement that might be interested in having someone like me there. So I'm just really grateful that you signed in to get all of this information from these coaches. I will be pulling everything together. And so if you're watching this on the recording, you're getting all of that. But each one of these speakers surely has given us some great information today. And I'm so happy to be your host. I'm Elle Ingalls with Pressure Free Living.